I remember that night like it just happened. The streets were almost empty, except for the sound of distant traffic and the occasional rumble of the subway under my feet. It was late, way too late for me to be walking alone, but my boss had kept me at the office again, and I didn't have a car. The city wasn't exactly safe after dark, but what choice did I have? The air was heavy with the smell of fried food from a nearby food truck mixed with something damp and metallic, like wet concrete after rain. I wrapped my coat tighter around me and kept my eyes on the ground, moving faster than usual. I hated that part of town. Too many dark corners, too many shadows where people could hide. That's when I noticed him. At first, I wasn't even sure. I caught the sound of footsteps behind me, soft but steady, matching my pace. My heart skipped. I tried to tell myself it was just someone walking in the same direction, nothing more. But then the rhythm changed, quickening when I quickened, slowing when I slowed. I glanced over my shoulder. A man in a dark hoodie, maybe mid-30s, was about half a block behind me. His face was hard to see, but I could feel his eyes on me. My stomach twisted. I pulled my phone out of my bag, pretending to scroll, pretending I wasn't scared. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped it. I told myself to stay calm, to just get to the bus stop 2 blocks away. Just 2 more blocks. But when I turned the corner onto 7th, my stomach dropped. The street light at the end of the block was flickering, and the road was empty. Not a single car, not a single person. Just me. And him. I started walking faster, almost running now, when a voice came out of nowhere. "Hey, miss. You okay?" I froze. A man, older, maybe in his 50s, stepped out from the shadows near the closed diner. His clothes were ragged and layered, his beard unkempt, but his eyes were calm. Kind. Before I could answer, he stepped closer, not too close to scare me, but enough to make his presence known. "Why don't you stand over here? It's safer by the diner." I didn't know why I listened, but I did. Something in his voice, steady, gentle, told me to trust him. The man in the hoodie slowed his pace when he saw I wasn't alone anymore. For a second, he hesitated. Then he crossed the street, kept walking, and disappeared around the corner. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until it came out in a shaky gasp. "You're safe now," the older man said, still keeping that calm tone. "You shouldn't be out here this late." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. He didn't ask for anything. Not my name, not my thanks, not money. He just nodded once, like it was nothing, and turned to walk back to the bench where I guess he'd been sitting before. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. By the time I found my voice, he was gone. The bus came a few minutes later. I got on, still shaking, still trying to understand what had just happened. The ride home was a blur, headlights streaking past like ghosts in the dark. When I finally made it to my apartment, I locked the door and just sat there in silence. Over and over, I replayed that moment in my head, the footsteps, the fear, and then that voice cutting through it like a lifeline. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man in the hoodie, and then, just behind him, the older man with those steady eyes. The man no one else seemed to notice. I didn't know it then, but that night was the start of something I'll never forget. The next morning, I woke up feeling like the whole thing had been a dream. My apartment was quiet, the sunlight spilling through the curtains like any other day, but something inside me had shifted. I couldn't stop thinking about him, the man with the calm voice and steady eyes who had stepped out of the shadows and, without hesitation, saved me. I replayed every detail in my mind. The worn-out layers of clothing, the faded baseball cap, the way his voice didn't carry judgment or fear, just quiet certainty. It was like he knew what to do, like he'd done it before. And then the way he had just walked away. No expectation. No recognition. Just gone. By the time I sat at my desk at work, my hands were restless. I kept typing the same sentence over and over, deleting emails before finishing them. I couldn't focus. All I could think was, who was he? On my lunch break, I told myself I'd take a walk, just to clear my head. But really, I knew where I was going. My feet carried me straight back to 7th and Main, where the diner sat closed in the daylight. The bench where I thought I'd seen him was empty. No sign of him. No trace he'd ever been there. I stood there for a while, feeling ridiculous. People passed by without even looking at me. A delivery truck honked. Life kept moving, like nothing had happened. But I stayed there, scanning every corner, every doorway. Looking for someone, a voice said. I turned, startled, and saw a woman pulling a shopping cart filled with bags. She must have noticed me standing there. I hesitated, then nodded. There was a man here, last night. Older, maybe 50s, beard, worn jacket. Have you seen him? She frowned for a second, then shook her head. Honey, there are a lot of men like that around here. Can't keep track. Then she pushed her cart and kept moving, leaving me standing there with more questions than before. I felt this strange mix of frustration and guilt. Frustration that I didn't even know his name. Guilt that I had walked onto that bus without saying a single word to thank him. I told myself I'd come back. Maybe I'd see him again. Maybe I'd get the chance. The following nights, I found myself taking detours after work. I'd walk by that diner, scanning every bench, every shadow. I didn't even know what I'd say if I found him, maybe just thank you, or maybe I'd bring him coffee, food, something to show I was grateful. One evening, about 3 days after that night, I finally saw him. He was sitting on that same bench, hunched over, his hands clasped like he was trying to stay warm even though the air wasn't that cold. My heart skipped. I almost turned around. What if he didn't remember me? What if he didn't want to be bothered? But then I thought of that voice, steady and calm, and I forced myself to take a few steps closer. Hi, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He looked up, squinting, and for a second, I thought he didn't recognize me. Then a soft smile crossed his face. You made it home safe. I swallowed hard. Yeah. Thanks to you. He shook his head like it was nothing. Just seemed like you could use a hand. That's all. I sat down at the edge of the bench, careful not to crowd him. I don't even know your name, I said. He hesitated, then said, people around here call me Charlie. Charlie, I repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it real. I didn't want to push him, didn't want to make him feel like I was prying, so I just sat there for a moment, unsure of what to say. The sounds of the city filled the silence, a car horn, a siren in the distance, the hum of people living their lives. I wanted to thank you, I finally said. For that night. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if you hadn't been there. Charlie just shrugged. You don't owe me anything. People look out for each other. That's how it should be. There was something in the way he said it, simple, but powerful, that stuck with me. Before I left, I pulled out a coffee I'd grabbed from the shop on the corner and handed it to him. For you, I said. He hesitated, then took it with a quiet thank you. As I walked away, I felt this pull, like I'd just scratched the surface of something bigger, something I didn't fully understand yet. I didn't know his story. I didn't know why he was there, or how someone like him had ended up invisible to the rest of the world. But I knew one thing for sure, I wanted to know more about the man who had saved my life. And if you're still here, listening to this story, take a second to subscribe. Because what happened next, it changed me in ways I never could have imagined. After that second meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about Charlie. There was something about him, something calm, steady, almost protective, that I couldn't explain. He didn't act like most people. He didn't look for pity or handouts, and he definitely didn't expect anything in return for what he'd done for me. He just existed, quietly, like a ghost in a city too loud to notice him. So, I made a decision. If he wasn't going to let me thank him with words, I'd find another way. The next night, I stopped by the corner store on my way to the diner. I picked up 2 cups of hot coffee, a couple of sandwiches, and a small brown bag of donuts. My hands trembled as I crossed the street, partly from the chill in the air, partly from nerves. Charlie was there, sitting on that same bench, his hands folded in front of him, staring at the ground like he was somewhere far away. I cleared my throat softly so I wouldn't startle him. Hey, I said. Mind if I sit? He glanced up, gave a faint nod, and scooted over an inch to make room. I sat beside him, setting the coffee and food between us. I brought these for you. Thought maybe you'd like them. His eyes flicked to the bag, then to me. For a second, I thought he was going to refuse. But then he gave the tiniest smile and reached for one of the cups. Thank you, he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. We sat there in silence for a while, sipping our coffee, the city buzzing around us. Cars passed, people talked on their phones, a bus screeched to a stop a block away. But in that little pocket of space, it was just us. After a few minutes, I asked, "Do you have family?" Charlie didn't answer right away. He stared at the street like he was watching something only he could see. Finally, he said, "I did. Long time ago." Something in his tone told me not to push, so I didn't. I just nodded, letting the quiet stretch between us again. Over the next few days, I made it a routine. On my way home from work, I'd swing by that corner and bring something, coffee, soup, whatever I could grab. At first, Charlie barely spoke. He'd accept the food, thank me, and sit in silence. But little by little, something started to change. One night, he told me about the library a few blocks away. "They don't care if you sit there for hours," he said, almost shyly. "It's warm. Quiet. I like the smell of the books." Another time, he mentioned he used to be a mechanic. "I could take apart an engine in an afternoon," he said with a hint of pride. "Didn't even need a manual. Each piece he gave me was small, almost like a test, but I held on to every one of them." Then there was the night it rained. Hard. The streets were shiny with water, and the air smelled like wet asphalt. I found Charlie under the awning by the diner, soaked to the bone. Without thinking, I pulled the umbrella from my bag and held it over both of us as we sat on the bench. "You don't have to do this," he muttered, shivering. "I know," I said. "But I want to." For a long time, he didn't say anything. Just sat there, watching the rain. Then, quietly, he said, "People don't usually stop. Not for me." The way he said it, like it wasn't even an accusation, broke something in me. I wanted to tell him that he mattered, that someone noticed him now. But the words stuck in my throat, so I just stayed there with him, holding the umbrella, sharing the silence. Slowly, I realized that these moments were changing me, too. I'd gone from being the woman who avoided eye contact on the sidewalk to someone who lingered, who looked for him, who wanted to know more about the man behind the weather jacket and the quiet eyes. And as much as I wanted to believe I was helping him, the truth was, he was helping me. I hadn't even noticed how lonely I'd been until Charlie started breaking through that wall, one quiet moment, one soft smile, one story at a time. I didn't know then that time was running out. That soon, those benches would be empty, and I'd be left with nothing but questions and memories. But for those nights, sitting in the glow of the diner sign with coffee in hand and the city humming around us, it felt like maybe we were both finding something we'd lost. The more time I spent with Charlie, the less he felt like a stranger. What started as awkward small talk over coffee turned into real conversations, the kind that stayed with me long after I walked away from that bench. It surprised me how easy it became, sitting there with him in the middle of the noisy city, like we'd created our own quiet world no one else could enter. One night, the air was crisp, and the streets were alive with people heading to bars and late-night diners. I brought 2 cups of hot chocolate instead of coffee, and when I handed him his, Charlie laughed. It was the first time I'd ever heard him laugh, soft and a little raspy, but warm. "Hot chocolate, huh," he said, shaking his head. "Haven't had this in years." "It's good for the soul," I teased, settling on the bench beside him. He took a careful sip and closed his eyes for a moment. "Tastes like Christmas," he murmured. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our drinks, watching the world move around us. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You know, you don't have to keep coming here." I frowned. "Do you want me to stop?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. I don't want you to feel like you owe me something." That night, I didn't do it to get anything out of it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "I know you didn't. But maybe I'm here because I want to be. Did you ever think of that?" For a moment, his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before, like the wall he'd been holding up finally cracked a little. After that, the stories started to come more freely. He told me about the small town where he grew up, about fishing trips with his father, about the old pickup truck he used to drive. His voice always carried a quiet pride when he talked about the past, like those memories were his way of keeping himself anchored. One evening, when the city felt unusually still, I finally asked him the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind. "What happened, Charlie? How did you end up here?" He was quiet for a long time, so long that I thought maybe I'd pushed too hard. But then he spoke, his voice steady but low. "Life happened. One thing after another. Lost my job. Lost my place. Thought I'd get back on my feet, but sometimes you get stuck. And when you're stuck, people stop seeing you. It's like you disappear. His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it better, but nothing felt right. So instead, I just sat there, listening, letting him know that, at least to me, he wasn't invisible. Another night, I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone. About my father, who walked out when I was 13. About how I'd moved to the city to start over but ended up lonelier than I'd ever been. About how scared I'd been that night when he appeared out of nowhere and saved me. Charlie didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice or judgment. He just listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel seen. "Sounds like you've been carrying a lot," he said quietly when I finally stopped talking. I nodded, blinking back tears I hadn't realized were there. "Yeah. I guess I have." He looked at me then, his eyes steady and calm like they'd been that first night. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't need someone to fix it. You just need someone to sit with you in it." It was such a simple thing, but it felt like the truest thing I'd ever heard. From then on, our meetings weren't just about food or coffee. Sometimes we'd sit there for an hour without saying a word, just sharing the space. Other times, we'd talk until the city around us started to quiet, until the glow from the diner sign flickered off and the streets grew empty. I started to look forward to those nights more than anything else. No matter how exhausting my day was, no matter how stressed or worn down I felt, knowing Charlie would be there made everything lighter. It was strange, the way it all felt so natural. Like finding a friend I hadn't even known I'd been missing. Like maybe we'd both been waiting for someone to remind us that we weren't as alone as we thought. I didn't know it yet, but those moments, those conversations, those silences, those cups of coffee under the hum of the city lights, were becoming some of the most important of my life. The morning felt strange before I even knew why. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, the kind that make the city feel quieter than usual, like it's holding its breath. I remember thinking, I hope Charlie's there tonight. Maybe I'll bring him that book I told him about. After work, I stopped by the little coffee shop on the corner like I always did. I ordered 2 cups, grabbed a couple of sandwiches, and tucked a chocolate bar into the bag, his favorite. It had become our little ritual, something that grounded me after long, exhausting days. But when I crossed the street toward the bench where he always sat, the space was empty. I slowed my steps, scanning the area. The diner sign was buzzing faintly, and a few people hurried past me, but the bench was just empty. No Charlie. No sign he'd even been there. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he'd gone to the library. Maybe he was at the shelter across town. Maybe he'd just found somewhere warmer to sit that night. It wasn't like he owed me his schedule. Still, I waited. For almost an hour, I sat on that bench, clutching the warm coffee cups until they turned cold in my hands. Every time someone walked by, my heart jumped, thinking maybe it was him. But it never was. The next night, I went back. And the night after that. And the night after that. Nothing. I started asking around. At first, I felt silly, but the longer he was gone, the more desperate I became. I asked the woman with the shopping cart I'd seen that first week. I asked the guy who sells hot dogs on the corner. I even asked a couple of the other men who hung out near the diner. Most of them just shook their heads. One man said he thought Charlie might have gone to a different part of the city. Another muttered something about a fight near the shelter a few days before. None of it gave me answers. By the end of the week, my nightly routine had turned into a search. I went to the library where he liked to spend time. The staff hadn't seen him in days. I called hospitals, thinking maybe he'd gotten sick or been hurt. Nothing. I even went to the police station, but they barely looked up from their desks. "We don't keep track of the homeless population like that," one officer said flatly, as if Charlie had never been anyone worth looking for. Each dead end made my chest ache in a way I didn't expect. I hadn't realized how much space Charlie had taken up in my life until he wasn't there anymore. The city felt different without him. Colder. Louder. I'd sit on that empty bench some nights, clutching a coffee I didn't drink, staring at the spot where he'd sit, elbows resting on his knees, that small, quiet smile on his face. It was like waiting for someone who'd promised to come home but never did. I thought about all the little details he'd shared with me, the way he used to work on cars, the way he liked the smell of books, the way hot chocolate reminded him of Christmas. Pieces of him that now felt like fragile souvenirs I was terrified of forgetting. One night, after another fruitless search, I sat there and whispered to myself, maybe he's okay. maybe he just moved on. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe he'd found a better place, maybe even a better life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. The city didn't care. People kept walking past that empty bench like it had always been empty. But I couldn't. I couldn't let it go. Because Charlie wasn't just some stranger. He wasn't just the man who had saved me that night. He'd become my friend. My anchor in a city where I'd felt invisible for so long. And now, he was the one who'd vanished. Days turned into weeks, and the bench where Charlie always sat stayed empty, like a ghost of what used to be. At first, I kept telling myself that maybe he'd just found somewhere safer, maybe a shelter that finally had room for him, or maybe he'd reconnected with someone from his past. But the longer he was gone, the more that hope felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I couldn't let it go. Every night after work, I retraced my steps, first the bench, then the diner, then the streets nearby where he sometimes wandered. I asked anyone who might have seen him. Most people just shook their heads, some with polite confusion, others with that empty look that said they'd stopped noticing people like Charlie a long time ago. "Sorry, lady," one man muttered outside the convenience store, pulling his cart along the sidewalk. "Haven't seen him in weeks. Maybe he got picked up. Maybe worse. Hard to say." Those words stuck with me, maybe worse. I started calling shelters. At first, my voice shook when I asked, "Hi, I'm looking for someone named Charlie. About 50, gray beard, kind eyes. He might have stayed there before." But every time, the answer was the same. No Charlie. No record. No one who matched the description. I even tried the hospitals. I didn't know what I would do if they said yes, if they told me he'd been admitted. I just knew I had to try. One after another, the nurses on the other end of the line told me there was no one by that name. Some sounded sympathetic. Most didn't. And then came the police station. I felt small just standing at the counter, explaining to the officer that I was looking for someone. "His name's Charlie," I said. "I don't know his last name, but he's always around 7th and Main. He saved me one night. I just want to know if he's okay." The officer barely looked up from his computer. "Ma'am, we don't keep tabs on the homeless. Unless there's a report, there's nothing we can do." I remember standing there, my heart pounding, wanting to scream. How could someone just vanish, and no one care enough to even notice? Walking back home that night, the city felt louder than usual. The traffic, the sirens, the hum of people's conversations, it was all just noise. And in that noise, I felt the sharp, empty ache. Charlie had been the one quiet, steady part of my life, and now that was gone. At home, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands and thought about all the moments we'd shared. The way he'd smiled when I brought him hot chocolate. The way his voice softened when he talked about his father. The way he listened, really listened, when I needed someone to hear me. I started writing everything down, every detail I could remember. The places he mentioned. The things he liked. Even the way he held his coffee cup, cradling it like it was the only warm thing in his life. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was scared that if I didn't, those memories would fade, and it would be like he'd never been real. One night, I went back to the bench with 2 coffees, even though I knew he wouldn't be there. I set his cup down on the empty spot beside me and whispered, "Where are you, Charlie?" The city didn't answer. The bench stayed empty. And I sat there until the coffee went cold, feeling the kind of loneliness I hadn't felt since before I met him. That's when I realized something that hit me harder than I expected. Somewhere along the way, Charlie had stopped being just the man who saved me. He had become my friend. The one person in this city who saw me, who really saw me. And now, he was the one who had disappeared. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again, but I knew one thing for sure. If I did, I wouldn't waste another second without telling him exactly what he'd meant to me. It's been 3 years since that night, but I still catch myself looking for him in the crowd. Every time I pass a man sitting on a corner with a cardboard sign, every time I see someone carrying a worn-out backpack or wearing an old army jacket, my heart skips a beat. For a moment, I think, maybe it's him. But it never is. It probably never will be. For a long time, I blamed myself for not knowing more. I kept thinking about all the things I didn't ask, all the questions I never got to voice. His last name. Where he was from. If he had family. If someone, somewhere, still missed him. But life isn't a movie. Sometimes people just cross paths for a moment, and that moment is all you get. The truth is, the man who saved my life, who reminded me what hope feels like, vanished without a trace. No one in the shelters had seen him. No one at the soup kitchen remembered a guy named John. A few people told me that's how it works for some of them. They stay in one place for a while, then move on. Maybe to another city. Maybe just to another street. Maybe somewhere none of us will ever know. That thought used to keep me up at night. It doesn't anymore. Because now, I think I understand. John wasn't just a man living on the streets. He was more than his worn coat and tired eyes. He was a reminder that kindness can come from places you least expect. That a stranger can show you more compassion in a single moment than people you've known your whole life. He taught me that even when you think you're broken, someone out there still sees your worth. And maybe that's why he appeared in my life when he did, because I needed someone to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. Since that night, I've tried to live differently. I stopped running from my problems and started facing them. I rebuilt bridges I thought were burned forever, with my parents, my sister, even a few friends I'd shut out when I was at my lowest. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. But in those hard moments, when I wanted to give up, I thought about what John said to me, "You're still here. That means you've still got a chance to make it right." And so I did. Or at least, I'm trying. I went back to school, picked up the pieces of the life I'd almost thrown away, and started volunteering at the same shelter where I used to look for him. Every week, I talk to people like him, people the world has forgotten. And every time, I wonder if someone out there is sitting across from John, listening to his stories, maybe getting saved by his quiet strength the way I was. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that first conversation we had under the overpass. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement. The way his voice was calm but steady, like he'd been waiting his whole life to tell me I wasn't alone. And I think about what I'd say if I saw him again. I'd tell him thank you, not just for that night, but for every moment after, for the life he gave me back. I'd tell him that I'm okay now. That I made it. That his kindness didn't go to waste. I don't know if I'll ever find him. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. Maybe that was never the point. Maybe he was just meant to pass through my life like a storm that changes everything but leaves no trace behind. But I carry him with me every day, in the way I treat people, in the way I refuse to look away when I see someone hurting, in the way I try to believe that there's still good in this world, even when it's hard to see. And that, I think, is what I know now. Not every story has a clean ending. Sometimes, the people who save us are never meant to stay. Sometimes, their gift is just a moment that pulls you out of the darkness long enough to remember that you're still alive. And that moment is enough. Wherever you are, John, I hope you found peace. I hope you found warmth and kindness, the same way you gave it to me. And if by some miracle you ever hear this, thank you. Thank you for saving my life.